What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Growth Nexus podcast. My name's Ryan Shelley, and today I'm excited to have Garin Hess as our guest. He is a serial tech entrepreneur and the author of Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder, How Buying Enablement Drives Digital Sales and Shortens the Sales Cycle. He's also the founder of Consensus. It's the leading product experience platform, and it helps buyers move through the buying process more quickly. So I'm excited about this conversation that we had with Garin. We talked a lot about the subjects in his book. It's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's really going to help you rethink the whole sales process. And before I get into any more of this, I'm going to let Garin teach us some cool things today. So let's head over to the interview. All right. So welcome back to the Growth Nexus podcast. I have with me today Garin Hess, and he is a startup enthusiast, and he's also a founder and the CEO of Go Consensus, and he's the author of a really good book I want to recommend. Selling is hard, but buying is harder. And so today we're going to be talking a lot about buyer enablement and how it really drives and shifts digital sales today. The buying patterns have changed. This applies for all types of businesses. We have to think about buying differently. And I really have enjoyed getting into your book so far and just kind of flipping a lot of like traditional B2B sales on its head, where we're kind of stuck in those old processes of really, really long sales cycles and having multiple stakeholders trying to get on the process. But this concept that you guys have not just written about, but actually put into practice, honestly, it's been very exciting for me. So yeah, I want to just have a conversation about the buyer enablement process and really how did it start? How did you kind of begin in this, and where has it gone from there?
Yeah, well, thanks, Ryan. It's really great to be on the show, and I'm looking forward to sharing this and discussing this with, especially for your listeners, because this is something that has transformed an entire industry and is transforming an industry. Some of the biggest companies in the world, like Salesforce, Workday, and others that have implemented this kind of process, methodology, attitude, and technologies that are related to it, just have had an amazing impact on their business. And the thing is, you can implement buyer enablement any stage of your company. So long as it's B2B, it's really a B2B strategy and B2B framework. But yeah, it's just interesting how much buyer perceptions, buyer expectations, behaviors have changed over the years. So looking forward to the conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was really cool in our first conversation, we just kind of shooting the breeze and getting to know each other, was how you kind of stumbled across this. Well, you kind of, you had all these things that you knew about, but how it kind of like started to play out for you in a real business sense, and what that did for your current business.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that really stand out about when my brain started latching on to this concept and trying to explore what this was. I didn't know what to call it back then. But in my previous startup, one of the things that we constantly wrestled with, for example, was the IT security audit. You'd get
Mhm.
near the end of a close, and IT all of a sudden pops up the 300 question questionnaire that takes 3 weeks to go fill out and go back and forth with them until they're happy with that. And I recognize this as sort of a friction point and a slowdown point in the sales process. And I was trying to figure out how in the world do we solve this? So I started creating, and this is before the advent of all the new IT security platforms, like information platforms like
Mhm.
Wistic and others that are trying to solve this from a SaaS standpoint. But so I just put together, I answered a questionnaire that a previous vendor or a customer had sent me and filled it out. And then I attached all these security information documents. And the next time before it even came up, I said to the customer, hey, this is going to come up probably in a week or two. We're just getting at this point where this always comes up. Can I send this to you and you send it to them and just see if that gives them what they need? And it was a bit like magic. I sent it over and they said, "Oh yeah, they said this works great." Like 3 days later, they said this works great for the size of deal we're doing. They just want to have a 15-minute phone call. We got on this 15-minute phone call and boom, that little piece was done. And it literally took what was normally a 3 to 4 week process, part of that sales, or what I call the buying process now, down to 3 days. And I just thought, "Whoa, that was cool." And that was one of the first times that it started. And And then the other one that really got me going was when we first got out and started this company, Consensus, which is really automating product demonstrations for other software companies, is kind of the main focus. And when we got out of beta with our first version, and we had 3 people in the company at the time, and I was the CEO and the salesperson and the SDR setting appointments and a lot of other things. And this was in January of that year, and clear back in 2014. And I remember because I started using it on a Monday, and I'm talking to these prospective customers, and I got one on the phone that said, "Hey, yeah, this sounds very interesting. I'd love to talk further." I said, "Great. Can we have this meeting on Wednesday?" And they said, "Sure." And I said, "Well, great. In the meantime, would you be interested in watching a video demo of what we do before the call?" And they said, "Sure, send it on over." So I sent them this link using our own platform to do it. First time we were using it. And what happened sort of blew my mind. So a couple hours later, I got this notification. "Hey, so-and-so's watching your demo." And I could see how they answered these questions about what was driving their interest. That's pretty cool. That was the person I talked to on the phone.
Hmm.
So it was really cool to see that they're engaging. But then what happened is I saw another notification that came in that said, he shared it with so-and-so, and she shared it with so-and-so. And this happened over the course of 24 hours. 12 different people engaged with that demo, watched the demo, answered these questions about what was driving their buying interest in the process. And then on Wednesday, I get on the call and all 12 of them showed up. And I'm just thinking that I have no idea what to do here because I have 12 people on my first call and they've all watched this demo. And I was just sitting there for half a second going, I do not know what's happening. So I just said, "Hey, I see you all watched the demo. In fact, I see all the way you all answered all these questions, and I see certain patterns in what your buying intent and all that is. But what I'm not sure where we should go here. What would you?" And the CEO, who happened to be on the call, was one of the ones that it got shared to. Just goes, "How about we talk about pricing?" And I said, "Okay," not knowing. We moved on the very first call to pricing, and they ended up buying 3 days later. And that I started thinking that was a process 3 to 5 months probably. I mean, at that point, we didn't know what our own sales cycle was, but, B2B
Right.
sales usually are very short.
Right.
Hey, and I just thought I don't know if this has ever happened in the world of B2B sales where 12 all the stakeholders that needed to make a decision engage. And I was really sort of troubled by that, which sounds strange, but it's because I thought I was building software to solve a demo problem.
Right.
And what was going in my mind that night was, is this a demo thing we're trying to solve, or is this about discovering and like grabbing and engaging those other stakeholders, all these people? Is that a people thing we're doing? Well, it turns out we were doing both, but I didn't know how to think about it back then. And that was kind of how we started the journey of and research of what enablement that has this ability to dramatically compress the purchasing process or the buying process, which, on the flip side for in a cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really fascinating to me. It's so cool how so many of these, I could call it innovations, can be really serendipitous, right? We come at it trying to solve one problem, what we assume to be the main problem, but we actually unearth the real problems at the core of what's going on. And sometimes we miss it, and we have to re-find it again years later. But what I thought was really cool is how you were able to kind of take some previous learnings. It seems like with that example with the whole IT, getting them involved in
Yeah.
security checkpoints and go, okay, something's happening here. We're
Right. Well, I was going to say it's interesting. One way to think about buyer enablement alone is just, where are the friction points? If you look at your own sales process, where do we always slow down?
Mm.
And then ask yourself, why is that? What's happening? And who's getting involved? Like another one where it slows down dramatically for almost everybody is in contracting. You get into contract reviews. Well, what can you do about that? And who gets involved? It's usually somebody from maybe the CFO or the legal department and different things. And there's different reasons that it starts slowing down there. And it almost always involves people and some task that they're trying to accomplish that is more difficult than it has to be. And that's kind of the crux of how you apply this principle of buyer enablement is how do we make buying easier for all those different stakeholders in the buying group that get involved in that process.
Can you share a little more about the idea of the buying group? And I also like the concept in the book that like we're not selling, um, the buyer is actually selling internally.
Right.
I think that is something important both for marketing and sales to kind of understand that one, it's not just one person, but that person who is your champion, they're actually the salesperson in this whole process. Can you share a little bit more just on that concept?
Absolutely. And when I think about marketing, for example, and marketing leaders and sort of the given structure and quantifiable targets that we're usually given when we're leading marketing, it's usually about qualified leads, marketing qualified leads and sales qualified leads that kind of make it over into sales. And that's not a bad thing, but when you think about the way B2B purchases are done, it's never one person, unless it's just a very small. I'll just say never. For all practical intents, it's never one person. It's at least two or more. And what's really interesting is the buying group. There was a study done by CEB Research back in 2013 that said the buying group was 5.4 people on average, just across all B2B industries. So 5.4 people. And then they actually shared this very interesting data that said that if you have one person that's making a purchase, and you have a good solution for it, the likelihood to purchase is about 80%. You add one other person, and it drops 30 percentage points in the likelihood to purchase.
Mm.
You get down to 5.4, and it dropped another 20 percentage points. It's like a 50 percentage point drop. The likelihood to purchase when you have a group of 5.4 was only 30% compared to 80%, roughly. And so what that means is the more people that get involved, the less likely they are to make to purchase. Well, that was in 2013. Forrester recently published research that said the average buying group size is now 13. I just read this yesterday. And I've known that it's been growing and I've been tracking it. The most recent one I read a couple years ago is 11. Now it's 13. It's like, that's more than double.
Yeah.
So imagine getting 13 people to decide on anything together.
Right.
I just think if 13 people had to go buy a car together or a house or decide on where to go to lunch, like it's almost impossible. And what happens when you get a big group together, like let's just take the lunch example, is the group gets together, and because of the dynamics of the group, the group ends up making a decision that is not in the best interest of any specific person or contingency in the group, but rather the one that least offends the whole group.
Yeah.
Meaning, oh, I want to go to Mexican. Oh, I'd love to go eat some Thai food. Well, maybe we should just go to this diner, where everybody can find something that's okay, but it's not great. And this is what happens a lot in B2B. And so kind of going back to the marketers, if you think your job is to get one qualified member of the buying group, that's your job, is to get the marketing qualified lead. Well, what you're going to leave 11 or 12/13 of the work to sales to get the rest of that buying group together. That's just an old way of thinking about it. And honestly, I don't think they used to think about it, sales or marketing, in these terms effectively anyway.
Right.
But marketers, one thing I wanted to mention to those who are in marketing in this audience is just, you really ought to be thinking about how can you bring more than one person. You're going to maybe get that champion, but how can you get that champion to engage other stakeholders even while they're just in those marketing nurturing stages, so that when they get passed over to sales, maybe there's 2, 3, 4 people to get passed over, kind of a qualified buying group.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how the buying group drives everything in a B2B sale, and honestly, how little conscious awareness or conscious methodology is put into trying to discover, engage, and help that entire buying group. We're so focused in the B2B industry on, let's get the buyer, we call it, the buyer, which is the champion, and that's not unimportant. But that champion, when you engage them, great, you pass them off to sales. Well, they're going to meet with sales, and then what's going to happen if they're interested? They're going to go share it with other stakeholders, all these hidden stakeholders behind the scenes, and that's really what the book "Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder" is about: is how do you effectively equip and coach that champion to go sell on your behalf?
Yeah.
Because that we often think of ourselves as a sales team, or as the vendor, we're the selling company or the company selling something. Well, that's true, but when you engage that champion, they have to go sell internally. So who's really driving? Who's doing more of the selling? You're hardly ever going to get access to that entire buying group, and so it's that champion that's kind of having to go run around in the company to sell on your behalf. And so the question is really, how do we make them effective at that, even though they've never been through our own internal sales training, and they've got to go to sell to all these others. And every single person in that buying group has a different perspective. And that champion is kind of like a toddler in some ways, not to minimize their professionalism, but they're very enthusiastic and unknowledgeable about selling your product. And so they will go with all the enthusiasm and sort of innocence, not knowing that they are going into a highly risky situation, maybe going to talk to this stakeholder or that stakeholder or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it's it's true, as you mentioned, the champion is the one that does the selling for you. So who's largely in charge of the selling? It's the champion.
Right.
And then if you think about kind of the flip side, who's in charge of the buying? Well, we usually think the buyer is, but the buyer doesn't know anything about it. Those of us in the vendor side, the sales team, the marketing team, we're the ones who know about how the buyers progress
Right.
through this process of trying to make a decision. So who should really be in charge of the buying process? The vendor, the sales team, the marketing team at the vendor site should be in charge of it. And so it's a flipping of roles. And the thing is, it's not really flipped. It's an acknowledgement of what's actually been happening for a long time. But we're just acknowledging that this is how it is. And if that's how it is, we've got to get good at doing both of those things, helping the buyer go sell on our behalf and guiding them through the buying process, because we know the best way through that highly risky and challenging process.
Right. Yeah, no, the first time we met and you were explaining it, and then I've been reading on it, it does make so much sense. So oftentimes in marketing, we talk about who are your buyer personas, and we only have personas that are built around and focused on our champion, that one person.
Yeah.
But in reality, like we've been talking about today, there's so many more people involved. There's so much more content that needs to be addressed. Like I can think of our own issues. Like, so we're usually having conversations with CMOs, or directors of marketing or directors of content, something like that. And they need to get buy-in from other VPs, finance teams, security teams, CEO. Everybody's got KPIs that they're interested in, goals that they want to see. And what if instead of just focusing on the person we're directly talking to, but creating a strategy, creating content, creating touch points to help them get that knowledge that they're lacking because they're not on this side, and walk them through that process ahead of time. Um, it makes sense in so many ways. It seems so much more natural to me because that's how you have conversations with real people in real time and space and community. Like if we were going like the old days, where you drive and you actually go physically to an office, you would go meet these people and you'd shake their hands
Yeah.
and you'd sit down and you'd talk through these things at a conference table. Why don't we do the same thing leveraging digital platforms, even if it is done anonymously? If we just kind of map it out ahead of time instead of just saying, well, here's our buyer persona and we're going for it. Um, yeah, it's kind of flipped my whole, some of the things I was doing up on its head, but it's been really, really good and healthy. So,
Well, it
um,
is interesting. And if you just think about from a marketing leadership standpoint, if you say my job, the reason we focus on the one buyer persona of the champion is because that's what we're measured on.
Yep.
That's what the whole marketing industry is measured on. And so that's why we focus on that. And we think that's the most effective just because that's what the industry's been organized around.
Right.
But yeah, imagine if you thought, okay, yes, we're going to focus on the champion, but we know that pretty early in the process, these others get engaged, or even late, we get stuck. Like, let's say it's the CFO that's always causing us trouble. Well, what could we produce for the CFO before it ever shows up on their desk?
Right.
And how can you sort of till the earth so that when the seeds of of that selling that the champion plants actually get into fertile soil rather than just hard ground. They show up at
Right.
CFO's office saying, "Hey, we think we want to buy this, and here's what we're doing," and the CFO's just like slamming the door in their face. And it probably seems a little daunting to marketers because it's a big job just to try to get the champions, right?
Right.
And so this is where, in a lot of ways, the whole industry needs to focus on kind of getting past these silos of marketing and sales engineering, client success,
Right.
because it's got to be a whole company effort to think about what is this buyer going through, who gets involved, how do we create and and distribute the kinds of content that and tools that the and technologies, whatever it is that the buyers need to make that process. But just the thought experiment of saying, wow, we already know who are all these other stakeholders that get involved. What could we do to make it easier for them to do the job they need to do when they get
Right.
involved?
And I think that's another good point that I really love. I think you're very good at asking questions and different questions. Like, how can we see this from another way? Who else have we seen this in the past? A- And I think we know to do that, but sometimes, like you said, we get so stuck on what the metrics that we're being asked to be reported on. When reality, we don't even stop to ask, are those the right metrics? I mean,
Yeah,
that's a conversation, right?
right. That might
Right.
have been those might have been the best metrics for 20 years ago,
Right.
but things have changed a lot since then, especially since the pandemic when so many things went digital and work from
Mhm.
home and remote, and it forced entire industries to move into a more digital medium that never
Yeah.
maybe wouldn't have done for another 10 or 15 years.
Right.
And so there's so much that's changed in the world of buying, and not to mention you think about just the big players like Amazon, Apple, Tesla, they've dramatically flipped the script on how you purchase things.
Right.
Amazon, let's just take them because they're the most interesting, I think. They've made it so easy to buy that you can buy something faster than you can put it on your to-do list.
Yeah.
And you think about they're great at a lot of things, but you could say the reason that they've won top position in retail is because they made it so easy to buy
Right.
what you need to buy. I'll pay extra. Like usually they have good prices, but I'll pay extra to buy off of Amazon because it's so easy.
Yeah.
And if you think about what that does to us as buyers, all of us who buy on Amazon, all of us who buy maybe from Apple or others that have that since copied what Apple has done, what does that do to our expectations as consumers when we are working in a B2B environment?
Right.
Now we're at our workplace and we try to buy enterprise software or whatever, tractor supplies or whatever it is. It's like,
Right.
it's super complicated and it drives you crazy because you're used to an easy process now
Right.
in the B2C world. And so
Yep.
these expectations have fundamentally changed the B2B buying expectations and the
Yep.
way that we behave.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of businesses, a lot of software, we work a lot with software companies as well. And like, you want to explore a product, you want to see these different ways that it could benefit not just myself, but my team and other people involved, other stakeholders. And they put so many roadblocks in the way to make it very cumbersome and hard. It's like, you don't want to talk about pricing. You don't want to tell me all your features. You actually don't even want to show me what your product does unless I fill out this really long form. I have to talk to you on the phone. Like, I'm not ready for
Right.
that yet. Like, and then that's where like marketing, I think, could prepare so much on the front end. And you don't have to tell everybody every single one of your prices, but at least like, I find those things friction points. Like, I will go to software. I'm like, if you don't tell me your price, I can easily find it somewhere else. I'll go find what it is because that's one thing I am going to
Yep.
want to look at. But so I'll do the extra research on myself just to avoid having to fill out that long form and having to schedule a call, and my schedule's already packed. And I'm like, why are you making this so hard? I always think that to myself. Um, but I never really put like roots in it. Um, but now it just, I will say it's been really interesting, this whole idea where, all right, let's ask those questions. And then how can we limit the friction to where marketing is helping sales, sales is helping marketing, because that's been the friction for so long, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
who's got the data, who's tracking what kind of data, and there's all these tools that are supposed to help, but it's like, there's still those silos where like, well, it's not my lead anymore. I don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to go get the next, similar lead, and then sales is like, but what about all this information, And there's just kind of this tension and friction, but if you look at a buyer group, it almost forces, I'll speak from marketing standpoint, it forces marketing to think a little bit more broadly about those other pain points, those other objections that could come off, and go, hey, we probably should start talking about this in our white papers, in our website, in our, you know, just the language that we use, so that we can actually cast a wider net and help sales ahead of time. Because people want to do so much of that anonymously ahead of time anyways. But then those who don't get it, now you still have that content that sales can use to help enable and promote. And I'm just kind of blabbering here a little bit, but this is getting it gets my mind thinking about how there's so many opportunities if you just shift your thinking a little bit.
Absolutely. That just a framework, and one of the beginning sections of the book talks about buyer empathy, right? It's just
Mhm.
once you put yourself in the buyer's shoes or in the mind of the buyer and really think about what they have to do and how complicated, challenging, and even risky and painful and slow and complicated it is.
Right.
uh, then just that alone helps you start to think about what can we do. But I wanted to touch on a couple things you said, and one of them is just the opportunity for marketers to take a more strategic role in the company instead of just thinking, oh, our role is, and I'm not saying CMOs and VPs of marketing don't think strategically. I'm not trying to offend anyone in the audience. I'm just saying you have an opportunity that's maybe even bigger than you're imagining to really fundamentally change what's happening at the company you're working at. So if you think about this buying journey or buying process, we call it a journey. I don't like to call it a journey. I guess in some ways it's a journey, but it's a perilous journey. It is challenging. Like it is more like a rat in a maze than a nice journey to a southern, Caribbean beach or something. And so when you think about that buying group's journey, how difficult it is, and and it goes from marketing and then into sales and then eventually to client success, and if you're creating the value, cycle, then it comes kind of back around to more purchasing and so on. Who is looking after that entire experience,
Yeah.
that entire challenging process? And I think marketers, because buyers initially enter in sort of the marketing phase as we think of it, marketers have one of the best opportunities to say, hey, I am going to take these concepts to the company I'm at and try to engage sales and client success and really create and work on this effort of making buying easier across the entire experience, right? It's an opportunity for leadership for somebody in the company. And many of our customers at Consensus have seen incredible upward mobility in their companies and influence because they take these concepts of buyer enablement and try to evangelize them and help, be change makers in the organization.
Right.
And it's fundamentally changed some of them. And so that's one thing I want to point out. But the other one is you're talking about how, man, early on, you just want to go like, show me what you got, right? That's what you want to see on almost every website. The most clicked call to action button on any website, if you have one, is book a demo.
Mhm.
Book a demo. That's the one that research shows is the most often clicked across B2B. And why is that? Because people want a demo. Well, what's better than booking a demo? It's like getting one right then.
Yeah.
So, that's when you think about all of that, how you said they won't even show you or talk to you about pricing or whatever, to show you the product and tell you get on a call, I think, why are you holding me hostage to your calendar?
Right.
Especially in 2025.
Right.
Why aren't we doing this in an asynchronous way that's efficient rather than we don't have to go on site? That's, if you had to go on site, it's one thing, but we don't have to in 99% of the cases anymore. And it just doesn't make sense to do things this old way.
Right.
And then the other thing is, like you said, buyers want to do so much on their own. We talk now about the antisocial buyer. There's research that shows they don't want to talk to sales unless they have to.
Right.
They don't want to engage in person or on a call unless they have to. Most buyers, they want to do as much as they can on their own when they want to do it. And it shouldn't come as news to us because isn't that how we behave in almost all our consumer buying?
Yeah.
Oh, almost always. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. What?
I mean, you even have to check yourself out at grocery stores now. I mean, like we literally have removed all of that interaction.
Right. That's true. Grocery stores are another one that's trying to make it easier to buy, right? It's just, yeah. And so these attitudes and behaviors have changed so much. There really is a shift. And like you said, what's interesting, you said something I'm not sure you even realized, which is, hey, if their pricing's not on there, I'm going to go find it, or I'm going to go find the pricing from a competitor, which this is where the crux of it. If you don't adapt your company to meet the needs of the new modern buyer, they will go to a competitor that has adapted.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the challenges that a lot of us as vendors need to wake up to is we as a company, we have to acknowledge things have changed. We can't keep doing these things the same way. And those B2B companies that will adapt to the modern buyer, they're going to win almost every time.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely. I mean, it really is fascinating how fast things have changed,
Yeah.
and continue to change and shift and evolve. So what would be, I know I want to be respectful of your time as well too, but what would be like maybe, where would a business start, if they're interested in kind of pursuing this a little bit more, learning a little bit more, what are some of the, maybe those key elements that you could kind of give?
Yeah, for sure. So, I can't emphasize enough, the content in the book is super helpful.
Mm.
So, selling is hard, buying is harder. It's a really inexpensive way to learn a lot about this.
Yeah.
And there's a whole section in the back on how to implement it
Mhm.
and how to measure your success at doing it.
Cool.
And this is, uh, the recommendation I'm going to give on where to start is in that section on implementation. So there are a couple of different things that I usually recommend once you understand the concepts. And this is just sort of a very skimming the surface, what we've talked about today. But once you're ready to start implementing, here's what you want to do. You want to get with people who know the buying group. And in your company, I'm kind of talking about audience now. In your company, you might have lots of different buying groups because you might have different segments, enterprise, mid-market, you might have different product lines and different things. And so you can't just boil the ocean at once if you're working at a huge company. But you want to get a team of people, both ideally from marketing and sales and maybe even client success, that really understand the buying group.
Mhm.
Honestly, it's mostly the sales that understands it because marketing has been passing this marketing qualified lead over, and sales then have to sort of get exposed, or if they're smart about it, they try to gather all those stakeholders. But it can't just be anybody in sales. And here's why. The research shows that only 7.7% of salespeople know how to effectively engage
Hmm.
this buying group, which is also crazy. Like, you think about that. Less than
Yeah.
1 in 10
Yeah.
know how to do this effectively. And yet they're sort of victims of it because they don't know how to lead it, right? If you don't proactively lead that discovery and engagement of those stakeholders, you will be a victim of it, and you'll have to overcome the reactionary situation you put yourself in.
Right.
So, but my point is, the first thing is you got to map the buying group. So pick a segment and pick a product line and or a product and say, we're going to start with this one. And you get some of the salespeople who do know how to do this. Some of your best salespeople, the ones that are always crushing it, they may not know that they're doing this. They may not be consciously aware of buyer enablement, but they've learned to do a lot of it. But at the very least, they're going to know who the stakeholders are, when they get involved, and why. And this is what, so the first task is to map your buying group. And you've got to say, okay, our champion is typically this. Well, in marketing, we usually know who that is, and sales knows who it is too. Well, who typically gets involved after that? And why? Is it early in the buying process? Is it in the mid stage or in the late stage?
Mm.
And why? And then ask yourself the question, and where do they get stuck?
Mm.
Right? And map that out. Start detailing that out. So for your listeners, you can go to buyerenablement.io. It'll take you to a web page where you can download a sample buying group maps.
Oh, cool.
They're fairly simplified, but it helps you sort of get started. There's two. There's one very simple one. There's just basically who gets involved and what are their titles. And then the other one is more about who gets involved, what stage, why, that kind of thing. But it helps get you pointed in the right direction. And if you were just to get, marketing leaders and sales leaders together, and some practitioners from sales also that are in the weeds with these buying groups, get them in a meeting and hash this out. You'll find that you already know the answers to all of those questions. As a hive mind, or the communal tribal knowledge has all this info, but it needs to be put together in this buying group map. And that's the very first step, because until you consciously are aware of who they are and when they get involved, why they get involved, and then where the kind of friction points, you don't know where to go with how do we help this process.
Right.
That's where I always try to get groups started.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. I'm going to go download it myself too when we get done here, and start working through that too. Because
There's a bunch of other stuff out there too. Just look for the buying group mapping.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's really cool, because you can take in all of these tools that we've had for years. Whether it be buyer persona processes and templates, or like even empathy mapping. But then taking this level up to the reality of today's buying culture, the reality of today's businesses and how they're being run, and then inserting that into our, current, just digital workforce and digital workplace, and using those tools to help move us forward, and bust through those walls of friction. So thank you so much, Garin, for taking time. This was an awesome conversation, and I'm sure I'd love to have another one with you in the near future.
It's been a pleasure.
Explore even further. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Ryan. It's been awesome. It's been great talking through it.
All right, so that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. I know this has been very powerful and influencing for me in my own buying processes, and really trying to understand the things that we're trying to do here with our business as well. Make sure you check out Consensus, and also make sure you check out his book. I'm telling you, it's definitely worth it. I would get a paper copy. You can write in the margins and notes. Those are really important things for me to do. Like I said, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please hit subscribe. Please share it with a friend, and we'll see you next time.